Hey everyone, welcome to the channel for another Escape From Tarkov video. In this one, I'm taking a look at the AKM and AK-103 after the recent buff to 7.62 AKs, and showcasing a few builds that I've put together after the buff that have been working really well for me. If you haven't heard, the 7.62 AKs got a fairly significant recoil reduction across the board, coming down to a much more manageable level, especially with a little bit of modding. This, combined with the fact that you can make the top tier 7.62 BP ammo using 1 green gunpowder at the workbench level 3, has made them a much more attractive alternative to AK-74s. 7.62 BP is a great ammo for dealing with pretty much any armor in the game except for the rare Class 6 vest, and crafting it in the hideout to run in these AKs is probably one of the most cost-effective ways to get top tier AP ammo. For the builds in this video, I've got 3 main ones that I'll be focusing on, covering budget, mid-tier, and full meta setups. I'll be swapping between the AKM and AK-103 for these builds, and I'll point out anything you'll need to do differently for one or the other. Also keep in mind that these are not the only good builds that you can make for these rifles. There's a ton of different great parts for the AK, but the ones selected in this video are either the best in slot, or what I would consider the best for their price tag, or the best at a certain level range. So with that intro out of the way, let's take a look at these builds, starting with the budget AK-103 setup. For this budget build, I'm going with the AK-103 because it's got better base stats, which means it comes out with much better stats overall when set up with a budget build. When it comes to the modernized AKs versus the older AKs, the general rule of thumb is that the modern versions work better as a budget build or suppressed build, and the older versions work better as full recoil setups because of the parts they can use. To start this build off, I got an AK-103 on the flea market, which is usually only around 30 to 40,000 rubles to buy straight up. Starting from the front, I think the best budget compensator for these AKs is the Spike Tactical Dynacomp, available at mechanic level 2 for only about 3,000 rubles. The AK-103 also can't use the top tier compensators anyway, and this one is available much earlier than other options. A solid second choice is the DTK1 compensator from skier level 2. For the handguard, my favorite budget and mid-tier choice is the CAA RS-47, sold by Peacekeeper level 2 for about $100. This one has decent recoil reduction and 4 rails for a pretty good price, and it's one of the best handguards you can get before level 40. The foregrip on this one is the Zenit RK4, sold by Skier level 2. Recently, the RK1 was moved up to Skier level 3, so this is one of the only decent foregrips left before you get level 3 and 4 traders. A solid second choice for this would be the Magpul RVG at Peacekeeper level 3, which is a bit more expensive but is all around a better foregrip. For the sight on this build, I went with the Dovetail OKP7 reflex sight, which is usually on the flea market for around 17,000 rubles. Some people dislike the reticle, but this sight is very clear and actually gives you recoil reduction as well, which is perfect for a budget build. I generally swap my pistol grips on budget AKs for the PP19 pistol grip at proper level 2. It's basically free and gives you some extra ergonomics, which is never a bad thing. The last part that ties the whole build together is the GP25 recoil pad, sold by proper level 2, that fits onto any of the standard AK stocks for plus 5 recoil reduction. It's one of the best budget parts in the game, and it's always worth the money. The overall stats on this build come out to 83 recoil and around 50 ergonomics. That's pretty solid for a budget 7.62 AK build, especially compared to what it used to be before the buff. The total cost of this build is around 80,000 rubles, and that's using the high-end price of 40,000 rubles on the flea market for the calculation. This build can also be set up pretty much identically on the AKM, except for the sight. You'll have to swap the OKP7 for another red dot sight on the handguard, or onto a TT01 adapter. Next up in this video is an all-around solid mid-tier AKM build, going for max recoil reduction without taking the price up too high. You'll need level 3 on most traders and level 4 Peacekeeper for this one as well. This one is based on the standard AKM because, as I mentioned earlier, the AKM can use some really great attachments that the AK-103 can't, and it generally ends up better in a purely recoil focused build. The price of the rifle is usually around the 35 to 40,000 ruble range on the market, so we'll start with that for the base price of the build. For the compensator on this one, the Venom Antidote muzzle brake is the second best in slot and sold by Skier level 3 for around 11,000 rubles. If you want to run a suppressor on this build, or any of the builds in this video, I think the best option is the DTKP suppressor, bought off the flea market for around 35,000 rubles. To get it onto the AKM, you'll need the TT AKM adapter from Skier level 2, so keep that in mind. You'll also end up with higher recoil overall if you go suppressed. The handguard is the same as on the budget setup, the CAA RS-47, because it's one of the best handguards for its price, and you don't really unlock a significant upgrade until mechanic level 4 at level 40. The foregrip on this one has been upgraded to the Zenit RK1 though, sold by Skier Level 3. It's a bit more expensive, but it's also the second best in slot option for recoil control. To get a sight onto the AKM, I usually just go for the TT01 rear sight adapter because it's very cheap and takes most red dot sights. For the sight itself, I like to go with an EOTech, and I'll be using that for the pricing in the build at around 20,000 rubles on the flea market. The stock on this build is what makes the standard AKM so great for most recoil builds, the Zhukov S stock, sold by Peacekeeper Level 4 for around $180. This stock has one of the highest recoil reduction stats in the game, and is an obvious choice for pretty much any full build AK setup if you have it unlocked. Finally, the pistol grip I went for on this one is the Tapco Saw style grip at Peacekeeper Level 2. For only $40, it gets you plus 10 ergonomics, and I just wanted to show it in this build as a very decent, cost-effective ergo booster. The overall stats on this build come out to 72 recoil and around 55 ergonomics, which is actually almost on par with some mid-tier AK-74 builds, which goes to show the 7.62 AK buff was a pretty solid improvement. The total cost on this build is about 125,000 rubles, which is about on par with the AK-74, though you can access the top tier ammo for the AKM much easier by crafting it. Before I get into the best in slot AKM recoil build, while making this video I actually stumbled into an AK-103 build that's a slight upgrade to this AKM for less money overall, which is a definite win-win situation. Most of the build is the same, but the first change is the muzzle device, which has been swapped for the SRVV 7.62 compensator. This one actually has less recoil reduction than the Antidote, but it's the best that the AK-103 can have access to. For a suppressor, the best option here is the DTKP as I mentioned earlier, about 35,000 rubles on the flea market. The sight has also been swapped on this build for the OKP7 dovetail sight, which adds some more recoil control to the build. Finally, the stock has been switched to the PT1 Classica stock, mounted on the PT lock adapter, both from Skier Level 2. You could also use the PT3 stock from Skier Level 3, which is about double the price but has slightly better stats. With this build, the AK-103 comes out to 70 recoil and around 60 ergonomics, which actually surprised me because in the past, the AKM had a much better recoil build with the Zhukov stock. The total cost is also slightly lower, coming out to around 115,000 rubles total. I think both of these builds are fairly competitive for their price, but this AK-103 build is much more cost effective and you don't need Peacekeeper Level 4 to put it together. The last build in this video is the new meta level full recoil AKM build, which comes out with surprisingly low recoil for a 7.62 AK, almost on par with the top tier AK-74 build. You won't be able to build this until you have level 4 traders unlocked across the board at level 40, so it's definitely a late game setup. On the AK-74, this build isn't really that much better than the mid-tier options, but for the AKM, it's a huge upgrade. Starting from the front, the best in slot compensator for the AKM is the Lantak Draken, sold by Skier Level 4. This one only fits on the AKM, helping it reach lower recoil than the AK-103. The handguard here is the best in slot option as well, the VL-Tor CMRD handguard, sold by Mechanic Level 4. The Aggressor handguard is a good second choice as well, but this one is the actual best in slot handguard. This one takes CASV rails, and you'll need a 6-inch rail to mount a foregrip. On this build, I went with the Zenit RK2 foregrip as the best in slot option for pure recoil. Next up, the stock is the same one from the mid-tier build, the Zhukov S stock. Again, another best in slot recoil item only available on the AKM rifles. To get an optic on this one, I went with the Fab Defense PDC dust cover at Skier Level 4, which gets you a nice ergo boost along with a top rail for scopes. As the optic on this one, I went with the Hammer Scope and Delta Point Reflex sight, which is my favorite scope combo. This definitely drives up the price of the build overall, and you can save a lot on the build by going with something cheaper. Finally, the last piece on this build is the Zenit RK3 pistol grip, sold by Skier Level 3. This is the best in slot grip for AKs and gets you a big ergo boost for a decent price. The overall stats on this one come out to 56 recoil and around 60 ergonomics. 56 recoil is something you normally expect from an AK-74 build, so getting there with an AKM that fires a more powerful round is pretty awesome and definitely makes the AKM viable for endgame PvP. The price tag on this one is quite high though, coming out at around 220,000 rubles total. However, about 60,000 of that is from the Hammer Scope and backup sight, so you can save a lot just by going with a red dot sight or cheaper scope instead. To set this build up on an AK-103, it would be mostly identical, with the stock and muzzle device the only parts that need changes. For the stock, you would switch to the PT3 from Skier Level 3, and the muzzle device would be the SRVV compensator. The recoil comes out a bit higher than the AK-103 at 63, but it's still a pretty solid build. The best in slot AK-103 ends up better overall with a suppressor compared to the AKM though, so if you want to run quiet, swap the muzzle brake for the DTKP suppressor, and this is the build for you. Well, that about covers it for my look at the AKM and AK-103 builds after their big buff, and I was honestly pleasantly surprised by how much better they are now. Overall, their recoil is still higher than an AK-74, but I find them very competitive now, and the easy access to large amounts of BP ammo through crafting have made them really appealing to me since I can run them consistently with very strong ammo. Let me know what you think of the builds, and hopefully you have good raids if you use them yourself. I'll be streaming more Escape From Tarkov on Twitch, and it'd be great to have you drop by the stream, so I'll link that down in the description. I've also got links to my Twitter, Discord server, and Patreon down there for anyone looking to join the community or support the channel. Thanks for checking out the video. Feel free to leave any comments, corrections, or suggestions down below, and until next time, stay safe in Tarkov City.